and welcome everyone to today's webinar. By way of introduction, I'm Anne Livingston and the Chair of the Queensland Government funded Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative. I will be the moderator for today's webinar titled The Future Possibilities of Smart Transport in Community Care. This webinar is part of a series of sessions being facilitated by Community Resourcing for the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative. We have now produced over 25 webinars in this series. These webinars have been designed from feedback and requests we have received through the collaborative. Our webinars are bringing together local, national and international perspectives in research and development, as well as focusing on the deployment specifically of smart assistive technology in the community care sector. Community Resourcing has extensive international linkages and has been fortunate to work in many international projects and research. Community Resourcing is very proud to have been awarded the National ICT Innovative Entrepreneurial Project of the Year Award at ITAC for this particular project. We're also particularly proud to mention that a number of our expert reference group members have been recognised in awards for their work relating to the collaborative. I'd like to particularly note Professor Greg Teggett, who was recognised earlier this year in the Australian of the Year Awards, and Dr. Mohan Karunanithy, Dr. Eleanor Horton, and myself being appointed by the Minister of Innovation, Science and the Digital Economy, and the Minister for Small Business as Advanced Queensland Community Digital Champions. A very exciting and recent development for us includes being finalists in the eHealth Queensland Startup and Innovation Showcase for a project that has emerged from this collaborative. Our expert reference group ensures that information and activities relating to this project are of high quality and focused. I would like to take this opportunity to highlight the work of our reference group and the project team, particularly in respect to the amount of engagement work that has taken place both within the collaborative site and statewide, nationally and internationally. Last week we held a number of forums involved with smart assistive technology which engaged individuals, family members, formal and informal carers and service providers throughout regional Queensland. It is great to get out to regional Queensland and to share the possibilities and benefits that technology can deliver. It's also great to have many of those new participants in today's session, as well as welcoming back many who have attended past webinars, indeed all 25 webinars. Today we have representation from every state and territory, as well as some international visitors on our link. We particularly like to acknowledge those attendees who are bridging time zones to participate. There's a lot of people on today's webinar who actually haven't registered on the collaborative, and on the slide in front of you today I'd encourage you to register at the website, and it's an easy process to do that. Those of you who have attended previous sessions know that Community Resourcing has been funded by the Queensland Government to bring together an online platform for community care service providers who are interested in collaborating on issues and practices related to smart assistive technology. Our project has achieved extensive national and international geographical reach, and this is growing daily. As many of you might be aware, we're in the final stages of revamping the platform as well as putting together a consumer portal on the site. And we thank the Minister of Communities and the department staff for funding us for these enhancements to the site. We've employed co-design and collaboration concepts in developing this new area, and we look forward to your feedback on these new enhancements. Please note that in presenting our work that neither Community Resourcing or the Department of Communities, Child Safety and Disability Services are promoting or endorsing any particular product, research entity or organisation. Rather, our webinars serve to inform viewers of examples of various smart assistive technologies in development or in deployment. As attendees of today's session, and in the interests of recording, we have muted your microphones. But we encourage you to ask questions, and these questions can be added to the question pane on the dashboard to the right of your screen. There will be an opportunity at the end of the session to have these answered. At previous sessions, we've been inundated with questions, so post your questions early to ensure that we cover this in today's session. In today's session, we will discuss the possibilities of smart transport in community care. I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Dr. Neil Temperely. Neil has led Data61's Transport and Logistics Living Lab activity since its formation in 2011. And before joining Data61's new product management team this year, Neil has a particular interest in digital product platforms for future cities, transport and logistics. Neil believes that future user-focused vision should drive our choices of today, and he also believes in the power of living lab collaborations to drive both effective innovation and industry cultural transformation. Neil sits on the board of the Australian Living Lab Innovation Network, which the Community Resourcing team are proud to be part of, and continues to play a mentoring role in Data61's Living Lab. The Transport and Logistics Living Lab that Neil will talk about in today's is its first of its kind in Australia, and was founded as a demonstration space for innovative technologies and as a community of industry, researchers and government organisations that work collaboratively to bring innovation into logistics. Please join me in welcoming Neil to today's webinar. Welcome, Neil.
Hi, and thank you very much. Just getting my screen to work. Here we go.
Fantastic.
So future possibilities. Oh, gone.
Thanks, Neil.
We're all good? Okay, look, thank you everybody, and I hope you'll find that my presentation useful. Future possibilities of smart transport in community care. First of all, I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction to Data61, which is probably new to many of you. Data61 is the digital portion, if you like, of the CSIRO. So it's about 1,100 employees. I think CSIRO is around about 5,500, so it's a sizable chunk of CSIRO. We have a lot of PhD students, so we do quite fundamental science in the digital space. Well connected to government and corporate partners and universities, have many patents and data-driven projects. The bottom line for Data61 and the CSIRO is benefiting Australia. So it's the innovation system, it's bringing about economic impact, environmental and social impact. Essentially, we're publicly funded, and this is what the game is all about. Why Data61 as a collaborative partner in an innovation adventure, if you like? Well, for many, we can be a trusted third party for those who are bedazzled by technology, and I think in the smart city space, that's not uncommon. You'll find councils saying, gosh, we're kind of out of our depth here with some of these technologies, and certainly Data61/CSIRO can play that kind of role. And we genuinely have world-class, world-leading ability, and it's worth reminding ourselves that the core portion of Wi-Fi, the core inventive portion of Wi-Fi is a CSIRO/Data61 invention. And one you may not know is if you're making a phone call on an Android phone, the bit of software that's sitting on the chip that's doing that work, the Qualcomm chip, is actually Data61 software. So the software that does the most work during a phone call on most Android phones is actually Data61. So if you've got an Android phone, think of us warmly when you're using Wi-Fi, and when you're making a phone call, think warmly of Australian innovation capability. At the end of the day, we want to be selling Australian solutions to the rest of the world. My topics for today are simply to give you a bit of an introduction to optimization and how it might apply to community transport, and also a little bit about what I'm calling home care as a personalised experience, with a bit of a focus on the transport side of that as well, and how we might get smarter in that process. So optimization, why bother? What is optimization? In simple words, it's doing more with less, or it's squeezing the most out of what resources you have, or maximizing the good and minimizing the bad, if you like. And why do you do it? You want to improve your productivity and efficiency. It depends on the application, but you may be interested in reducing wasted time, effort, resources. Or you might be thinking in a transport application, you might be thinking of let's minimize the cost, or the number of kilometers driven, or the total CO2 created, or the travel time, or waiting time. And so these are all important factors in the design of a system. Is what is important to you as a user if you're a community transport organisation, what is important to you that you want to work on to maximise or minimise, if you like. And of course, for many organisations, they want to maximise their profit, or the quality of service, or the speed, or the reliability. In the process of doing this kind of analysis, you can actually get control of your spending. And what I mean by that is, popping out of this analysis can come the cost to serve individual clients within a community transport system. And so that can give you a great handle on how you're spending your money, where it's going, and are you making the best use of the resources that you have. Community transport's a particularly interesting one because it's just so complex. And again, I think there are probably many experts on the phone, on the connection, who know more than I do, but just to give you a bit of a flavour, they have to deal with many different kinds of vehicles, their cost, their availability, their capacity. They might have a mixture of vans and private vehicles. They might be also utilising services such as taxis and public transport. You've got drivers who have different availabilities, different capabilities of driving different bus types, or maybe even suitability. One friend told me that some clients don't want to go with male drivers, so they have a requirement to only go with female drivers. You have to deal a lot with volunteers who have a variety of availabilities, capabilities and suitabilities for the task. Similarly, your clients, when what capabilities do they need special needs, where are they located? The travel is complex, the routing is often a common one, what's the shortest distance between points, but you may need to get around congestion, there's fuel, cost to serve issues, which I mentioned before. And of course, at the end of the day, the goal is not the journey, the goal is actually to make a meeting or an appointment, and so reliability of meeting those goals is actually a key requirement for any transport application. We call these things constraints, so you might think of them as business rules, picking people up within time windows, dropping them off within time windows, they're all constraints, all of those things mentioned there. And so there is a particular flavour of optimization called constraints programming. It's a mathematical flavour, and it's certainly well suited to this kind of problem. Some generic rules about optimization, and this doesn't matter, this is independent of what flavour of optimization you might be using. These are just general rules, and that is the more complex the problem, the bigger the gain. So the more complex, you're going to gain more. You're going to get a bigger benefit from your optimization. The best solutions take the problem as a whole. If you chop the problem up before you try and solve it, you're limiting your options. And so to get the most options, you try and take the problem as a whole if possible. It's really important to remember it's not about the technology. You can run numbers through a computer, you get some answers, and at the end of the day, they may not suit the way your business operates, or more importantly, they may not suit how your clients operate, and it may actually suggest changes to your operations that are just more radical than your staff or your clients can cope with. It may actually be more efficient, it may save you money, but it may just be too radical a change. And so these are the important factors to take into account. And so people apply optimization usually pretty carefully and in bite-sized chunks so that it's not too radical a change. Or sometimes you may actually pre-think what some of those requirements are, so the change isn't too dramatic, and you may actually factor that into the requirements of the solver. For instance, you may have drivers who prefer to stay within a particular area because they're experts of that area, they know all the back streets and so forth, and that might be a requirement you may want to optimize and include that requirement in your optimization strategy. You want to know what you want to achieve up front, which is one example is just what I mentioned. So what dials, what mix, what controls, what's important to you? Do you want to minimize time or waiting, or do you want to maximize customer service, or some mix of the above? So a few rules for community transport optimization from my perspective. Is it the right tool? What is the right tool for the community transport? Excel certainly isn't. Community transport, I know enough about it to know that it's really, really complicated compared to some other examples in transport logistics. And so whenever you look around and you find some of your staff using Excel and you're thinking, gosh, the problem's a little bit more complicated than you think, you know, your gut feeling is telling you that it's a bit more complicated than what you can do with Excel, then you're probably right. And there's probably better tools out there. The other thing is that not all optimizers are the same. You don't get to see what's below the bonnet when you buy an optimizer or when you work with a company that's creating one for you. But they have different, if you like, engines underneath the bonnet, and that's the maths that they use. And different mathematical techniques are better for some problems than others. And they vary in their speed, the quality of the results, and their capability. At the end of the day, all optimizers should help somehow, but some are a better fit to the problem than others. And we advocate constraints programming, one, because it seems like a natural fit to the nature of the problem, and two, because Australia has a lot of very good constraints programmers. And so we are not second to the rest of the world in that capability. So off the shelf may be okay, but it may not be the best. The warning signs for a particular tool. If it doesn't do exactly what you want, if it doesn't handle all the factors that you know you want to include in solving your particular problem, if there's a lot of human intervention required, you know, we run the solver, we intervene, and then we run it again, that's kind of a warning sign that perhaps the solver hasn't been set up properly for your particular problem. A classic warning sign is if you're forced to chop the problem into sections, either because the computer just can't handle it, it's too slow, or it's just there's aspects to the problem that it can solve but it can't solve other problems. But if you're chopping a problem into chunks, reducing the big problem into smaller ones, you're missing out on options. And long solution times, of course, is an indicator that perhaps the mass isn't the best choice for the problem or the best match to the problem. Data 61 is actually tackling something in community transport. It's pretty new. It's coming from one of our lead researchers in Canberra, and these are what he wants to do. He's in the process of doing it. He's taking a holistic approach. He wants to include not just community transport, but buses, Uber, taxis, autonomous vehicles. So I've had a few conversations with a few people in the field, and you can see Uber as a competitor to community transport, or you can see it as just another resource. And he's taking the more positive view of saying, well, it's another resource, it's another kind of transport. We should factor it in as one of the options. And so you include that in the solver. You don't treat it as a separate thing, you include it. And then, of course, you want to integrate this as much as possible. So you want to be able to help people plan and book a personal itinerary that takes into account multimodal solutions. And so when we say multimode, we mean if you take a bus and mix it with an Uber or a taxi and a bus ride or a taxi and a train ride, you're mixing what we call multimodal transport solutions. And again, of course, as I mentioned before, you want to optimize the mix, depending on some trade-off between time, cost, waiting, whatever is the appropriate balance for you. And the people out there are the experts. I'm not. So it's what the community transport organisations need. Let me just give you a few examples of optimization. I can't resist putting Angela Merkel up there because she did come and visit our Transport Logistics Living Lab, and she did get to play our optimization game, which we tailor-made for Germany. And but the game that we provide is actually based broadly on a real-life example of bread delivery in Australia, where one of our leading bread companies is delivering to 20,000 stores daily from roughly 11 centres, and it's a complicated problem. The problem is, what fleet should you purchase? Like, what mix of large and small vehicles should you purchase? Where should you base those vehicles? And what route should you put them on? So is it smarter to buy, 300 or to lease 300 or subcontract 300 small vans, or a mixture of large trucks and small trucks? And where should you base these trucks? And it rapidly turns into a very, very complicated problem. And we help them by tens and tens of percent in their profitability. So we didn't just look at, let's reduce the cost, the number of kilometres. That, of course, was important. We looked at the amount of money they're earning from each of their customers on an individual basis, and look to maximise the profitability of those customers. And you get some interesting things happening, which I'll demonstrate in these next few slides. This is just a simple version. Here we are trying to do some distribution to some shops from that little square near the, I don't know whether you can see my cursor, but that little guy there. We're going to do some distribution to these shops, and this is the revenue. The size of the grey circles is the revenue from the particular shops. And this is called a cost to serve example, where you take into account the cost to serve these individual shops. The colour of the dots shows you profitability. It doesn't show you the number, so of course the numbers would vary, but basically green dots are good and red dots are bad, and you want your optimizer to turn red dots into green dots. And that's what we do. You do the calculation and it tidies up the routing. So you go from typically something that looks a little bit spaghetti-ish to something that looks a bit neater. But more importantly, you've taken red dots and turned them into green. Gosh. And if you're red and green colorblind, I apologize at this point in time. You'll notice this poor little guy down the bottom left here, he was included and now we've excluded him. Why? In this particular calculation, he just couldn't be made profitable. And so in this particular solution, he's dropped off. Now in practice, you're probably not going to drop off a client, or if you're doing bread distribution, you're not going to drop off a major shop from your deliveries. But what our client did in the bread example was, for all the non-profitable shops they were delivering to, they could rank them in terms of lack of profitability, and they had conversations with them and basically said to them, look, can we deliver to you less often? Could you pick up your bread at this other location? Could you drive to the next town and pick up your bread? So they had the information they needed to have the conversation they needed to have to keep customers as happy as possible and still improve their profitability. And that's the power of this kind of what we call cost to serve analysis. And I suspect it's potentially very, very powerful in the community transport space as well. Just understanding where your money's going. Do you need to have some conversations with people about the level of service, the quality of the service, the type of service, the frequency, and so forth. So that kind of covers off my introduction to optimization. I hope that was clear. And I just want to move on to the kind of personalized experience view, which is a view I hold for transport as a whole, but I have limited time and I just wanted to sort of focus in on a home care kind of application of this. But when I talk about this, I usually talk about this as transport. And so on the left here, it would normally be transport apps, whether it's the app that tells you where your bus is, or the app to catch Uber or taxis. And typically all these different kind of solutions in the app space are just not integrated. They're separate little stack of tools you might use as someone who's using the public transport system, for example. And if I think of what about home care, again, you have all these different services which may or may not be providing apps and software solutions that are almost for certain not well integrated. So they kind of exist as a jumble. And while people say, we'd like the killer app to do all that doesn't exist in this space. The vision, of course, is to try and integrate these services in such a way that they do integrate naturally, and you could very readily give a client one interface to all of these services. And my understanding of the home care space is the plan is to do that a little bit structurally, so you have a bit of a one-stop shop for a whole lot of services, but nevertheless, someone somewhere along the line is experiencing the pain of particular computer systems not interoperating, not talking to each other, not working in a nice integrated fashion. The way to think about this, I believe, is you start with a valid customer-focused vision of what the future should look like, what the ideal experience is for the customer. So you want to take that user focus, put aside the technology for a side, think about what the true needs are, work through the use cases or the examples, the everyday life examples of a particular client or customer type, and then think about the digital foundations, if you like, that the innovators will need. So my hypothesis, if you like, is that if we set the digital foundations right, then the innovators, the app developers and everybody else have all the information at their fingertips they need to develop those solutions that will benefit the customers. So let me just take that a little bit further. Here's a customer-focused vision for you, which you can take or leave, and that is the idea of a personal assistant or a virtual concierge. So, and this is not new by any means. If you have an Apple phone, Siri is attempting to be a bit of a personal assistant for you, a sort of a smart assistant, and we just see that trend going on until the point that you have something that is very, very useful to you, probably voice activated, perhaps attached to your phone or attached to some other device, but essentially it's helping you organize your life and minimizing the hassle, paving the way for you. And it's this kind of smart systems that I think can take complex situations and help smooth it out for you. That's what a good personal assistant does for you. If you're fortunate enough to have someone to help you in that way, that experience, there's no reason why as we go forward, that experience won't be the same for everybody, whether you're a person who's an aged person or just a regular commuter going to work every day. You will have some kind of virtual concierge helping you through your daily activities. And just a note on customers, there are many customers. If you're in community transport, you probably think of your client as the #1 customer, and that's perfectly correct. But also there's a whole bunch of other people who you interact with. These are nurses, drivers, cleaners, volunteers. These are all, in a sense, customers of a system that's trying to benefit the client. The nurses need the right information at the right time. The drivers, the cleaners, the volunteers, they all need the right information at the right time. They all would like to have a virtual concierge, or at least that is the future. The virtual concierge is the future. We're not pretending to try and build that now. What we want to do is build the foundations to work towards that. And so in the first instance, they might be using some apps and things that are well connected that make their life easier. So in thinking about that, we need to understand what I called the use cases before, what information needs to be exchanged, what information needs to be stored, and what digital systems are needed to support the information exchange. I'll just pick on one example, which I think is a prime target that could benefit many, many applications for home care scenarios, and that is the diary. That if you take a client or any person in normal work life, myself, yourself, you will have diary systems. I think of my mother when she was living at home alone. She had a very complicated diary. She had nurses coming in, she had cleaners coming in, she had Meals on Wheels coming in. Sometimes she was so nervous that she didn't want to go out because she kind of got confused and is the nurse coming? Oh, I can't remember. Oh, I think they cancelled. So her diary was getting more complex than mine in many ways. That's the way it seemed, and it certainly caused her a great deal of stress. So I think there is a real opportunity as part of those building blocks to help sort out the diary issue. From our perspective, we'd be thinking not only of the we would be thinking of the foundational layer where information can be exchanged between the various people who need to have interaction with a client's diary. From the client's perspective, of course, they need a really good user interface, and I'm not pretending to be the designer of that user interface, but there are experts, user experience experts who we employ when we get to those kind of situations where we need to make a user interface, and they work out through lots of interactions with clients what is the simplest interface, whether it's voice, whether it's visual, whether it's a mixture of the above, on what kind of device it should appear, that ultimately presents that diary to a client as simply as possible. But of course, behind the scenes, we want really efficient ways to alter that diary. When a nurse can't arrive on time, the way for the nurse to communicate directly to that diary that they're going to be running late. And if in the future world we might have virtual concierge, the virtual concierge might actually be able to speak to the client and say, look, the nurse has just called and unfortunately can't make it. Is it okay if she comes 30 minutes later, for instance? I hope you get the concept without me having to sort of explain it too much beyond that. These are some of the digital building blocks of fixing the diary challenge. And when we talk about open systems, if you've heard of that expression, or interoperable systems, or secure systems, this is all about the data. The backbone, the hidden portions of getting the diary challenge fixed is about having data accessible, having data standards in place so that the nurses can drop their data into a system just as easily as a handyman could drop data in, just as easily as a community transport person could drop the data in. And of course, whenever we're dealing with people's personal data, we want to make sure it's secure and private, so we may have to encrypt data or take particular strategies on board to ensure that people are comfortable that their data is being used in this way. But at the end of the day, if we get it right, we provide much better services to our clients. And so that concludes my presentation. Ultimately, I think optimization has a big role to play in community transport, if for no other reason than community transport is a really complicated challenge, and potentially getting more complicated as home care services come into being, and some of these services will be more encompassing and taking on more than just transport. But also, I think as we deal with clients, particularly ones whose diaries get particularly complicated, I think there's room to move there to improve their lives as well. Thank you very much.
Neil, I've got a number of questions have come through already, and I'd encourage people to post their questions on the question pane on the right. So Neil, I want to kick off with a question to start with from one of our reference group members, Dr. Mohan Karunanithy, one of your colleagues in CSIRO. Mohan had the opportunity to have a ride on many driverless vehicles in Europe and more recently China. And he writes and asks what you see the impact driverless cars will contribute to community transportation.
Look, thanks, Mohan. A good question. My view on this is that it becomes part of the mix. So in the slide where I showed that what Data 61 is doing in this space, autonomous vehicles just slotted in beside taxis, Uber and other options. And I think that's the way to view it. From a human perspective, of course, I imagine that some clients in community care, it won't be suitable to have an autonomous vehicle because they just need a human person to guide them through. But for those who are comfortable with autonomous vehicles, it's going to be a cheap and effective option. All indicators are that it will be, and it will transform our transport space quite a lot.
Thanks, Neil. The question pane is filling up quickly. So I've got a question from Russell on the Sunshine Coast. Given your diary example, Neil, do you think it's possible for community transport organisations to collaborate more closely with in-home care organisations? This collaborative approach may assist and could also be part of the optimisation process.
I think the answer is absolutely. I think that increasingly to help people, whether it's in transport, whether it's in community care, collaboration is a key aspect. Technology can only get you so far, but if one piece of technology can't talk to another piece of technology, that can be a really break point. You'll see people who are very keen on transport options, and they'll say, yes, I've got my Uber app, I've got my Lyft app, I've got this app. You know, I went to a conference the other day, and the chap mentioned, I think he had 40 transport apps. He travels around the world. That's not efficient. That's not efficient. And so Yes, and why can't we do this better in Australia than everybody else? We can, but the secret is to get on the front foot about being collaboratively and work with those other agencies to get the digital foundations, if you like, the data foundations right.
Terrific. A couple of comments on the pane here, just from Terry. Thanks, Terry. Great presentation. And others that have thanked you for their presentation today. We've also got a really interesting one from our colleague Harry, who does a lot of work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And he asked that I would like to know what advancements are being considered for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our current society, influencing suppliers, stakeholders and industries is somewhat of a challenge. Are you aware of any projects, Neil, that are operating from Data 61?
Look, I'm not, but Data 61's a relatively large organisation, and CSIRO is much larger. So CSIRO as a whole does pay attention to the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and I know that we have some people dedicated to that. But unfortunately, I can't comment on any particular initiatives or technologies that are aimed at servicing those particular communities.
Thanks, Neil. I've got a comment from Jeff. I think, Neil, you've created, Jeff, some more work. He said, I'm going back to the drawing board. Thanks for the great presentation today. Neil, I'm going to take a big chunk and look at that and stop picking at the smaller pieces. Maybe we've created Jeff more work, Neil, but maybe in the end there will be a benefit from doing that. I've also got another one from Belinda. Belinda says, really great presentation today. Thanks, Neil. I've been to sessions about the reform process in community care programs. Some of these have been at a state level, others in Commonwealth. But it seems obvious to me that community transport is a program that is in the spotlight. You've talked about doing more with less, and this is the reality for us. Minimising cost is really our big driver. I've been recently pointed towards open source software developments. Do you have any comments on this?
Look, many of our researchers are very big fans of open source software. There's many good reasons to use open source software. It's not so much a question, if you're thinking of a tool to do optimization, for instance, for community transport, it's not so much a question of whether it's open source or not. It's really more of a question of, is the tool well suited to your problem? And I know that may be a question that's a little bit outside the technical expertise, but what you can look at is, if people are using that particular tool, what kind of inputs and outputs it takes, what kind of, if you like, dials you can tweak, and if it hasn't got quite what you need, then maybe it's worth having a conversation with an organisation like ourselves. And on the topic of collaboration, I think that it's just a really good idea, and it sounds like you're well connected to the community transport community. It's just a good idea having a talk to people about the pros and the cons of the software they're using now. I think there's a couple of different kinds of software out there now doing optimization. I suspect they're not kind of all singing, all dancing and achieve absolutely everything people would like, but they're making a big improvement nevertheless. So again, that whole collaborative thing, I'd say keep connected to the communities and learn from each other. There's in many of the smart city solutions, just talking more broadly about smart cities, there's not many plug-and-play solutions out there yet. There's so much of these technologies are new. Take some reassurance that there's not too much plug-and-play, and so the best thing you can do is try and leverage the experience of others and share some of the learnings amongst your own communities of practice.
Thanks, Neil. Another question from Jody. Jody's asking about, are you aware of any trials in regional and rural areas? In addition, do you have any comments on how this would fit with responding to customers with very high needs who perhaps live in areas for which knowledge and the use of technology is limited?
I think there's a couple of questions. So I don't think Data 61 in this particular space is doing any particular new activities in rural areas. The work that I mentioned in Canberra is our sort of starting point, applying this kind of optimization to community transport. We're dipping our toe in the water in this space, but we have extensive experience applying optimization to many other kinds of problems. It's a very generic tool. You can apply it to all sorts of things like crew rosters for an airlines and many different applications. So we have extensive experience, but just not specifically in the community transport. But I think we have the skills to do something quite special there. I suspect what can go wrong for you in rural circumstances is sometimes you don't have a lot of options. So optimization works when there's many different options and you're trying to work out which is the best. But if you have one road between two towns, there's your route between the two towns. There's not alternative routes, for instance. And sometimes those things really restrict your flexibility in coming up with new solutions. And then finally, on the people who aren't used to technologies, that is one of the biggest challenges that we need to get right. And the way we try and get that right is by using what we call user experience experts. So you want these people who understand about user interfaces and what works and what doesn't, and what is easy to use and what isn't, to help those particular clients in the best way possible. So you have to present, you're not trying to present them with the technology, you're trying to present them with information. You're trying to present them with the information they need to make a decision, and you're trying to present them with services. It's not about presenting them with, look, I've got this great tablet for you or a great iPhone app or whatever it is. And I think if we take that focus, we will make fewer mistakes. It's always going to be challenging, but we'll make fewer mistakes.
Thanks, Neil. Got another question from Gregory. It's regarding the optimization. Have you thought about traffic and what the best time of delivery of community care services are?
Yeah, so look, this is a good topic in its own right. We have many skills. Optimization is one of them. Another one's called machine learning, where you look for patterns in data. And increasingly we have access to traffic data, and not dissimilar to what Google do on Google Maps. You can calculate, congestion and travel times. And if you have information, yes, you can include that in the solver. So you can say, if Tuesday afternoons for some reason is particularly bad, if we can put that data into the optimizer, it can say, okay, we need to do something different. Or on Tuesday afternoons, we need to use different routes, or maybe we do fewer services, or we put everybody in one bus and go the easy route and then split them again, whatever that solution might be. But definitely traffic is, particularly operationally, and when I mean operationally, that is when you've got the vehicles, driving on the road, managing traffic, moving at the right times of day, avoiding traffic jams and things is all part of the mix.
So there's another question on that same sort of line, Neil, around we thought about the interlinking with navigation apps.
Yeah, and again, it's really not a question of do we need to interlink with a navigation app. It's more of what information do we need to provide, to solve this in the most efficient way possible. So if we're trying to help the driver, yes, they need the best navigation system. Yes, ideally you'd like to integrate with whatever app they're using, and that's where one of the fundamental challenges lies. If that app is a particularly proprietary one and that particular company doesn't want to play ball, you have a problem, and you might have to try and work around it by providing navigation through alternative methods, via a mobile phone app or whatever it is. But these are the kind of challenges we face on a regular basis. The best we can do, particularly for emerging areas like community transport and home care, is to think about it hard up front and understand the kind of data that's really important for us to share with each other, with the drivers, with all the different kind of clients and customers of the system, all the users of the system. Think it through very, very hard. Work out what's essential, work out how we're going to save that data and store that data in a way that makes it accessible to those people who are doing the nav systems or the apps or whatever it is. But again, my interest is getting that data layer fundamentally correct is one of the key elements to providing better services.
Thanks, Neil. We've got a number of questions that I guess relate to people who are working in our community care smart assistive technology collaboration and indeed collaborating in the collaboration, which is what we want to see.
Yep, brilliant.
Some of those are interested in collaborating statewide on issues around smart assistive technology in a range of applications, not just in logistics. And it's great that to have your presentation today. There is going to be a forum site that Liz and the project team are putting together in the collaborative. So I'd encourage people to join those. And I know we're already joined to several projects, including one that's being undertaken by a regional development authority who's doing some great data analysis on transport. So I guess, Neil, your presentation today is obviously a great lead into contacts with Data 61 and more involvement with some of the other projects that your colleagues in CSIRO are doing as well. But Neil, we're running out of time for questions, and I do apologise for those people who are continuing to post questions. We will get back to everyone with an answer to those questions after this session. I just want to take this opportunity, Neil, to thank you formally for your presentation and for your willingness to take questions today. So on behalf of everyone on the webinar today, I'd like to acknowledge the time that you've taken and the value of your presentation today.
And it's been a pleasure. I think the collaborative's doing a great job there, and so all power to you. I'm very happy for you to share my email address with all the participants of the webinar.
Thanks, Neil. I'm sure you'll get plenty of contacts from today's webinar. Thank you again, and I just want to remind people that we've got a number of other webinars coming up. The Living Labs on the 2nd of November. Building on from what Neil had said about the Living Labs network, we're going to have a number of people from the Australian and European network talking about Living Labs, co-design and co-creation in action. We're going to follow on the 18th of November on a smart assistive technology transforming transport services and work opportunities. And this presentation is being delivered by Uber, so I'm sure it will be of interest to people who've joined this webinar today. We're also have a number of upcoming engagement activities. In February, we're planning to head out in Central West Queensland to do a roadshow fairly similar to the one that we held in Wide Bay last week. And in April, we're also going to be visiting far north Queensland. So please, if you're in those areas, let us know, and we'd love to link up with you while we're travelling in those areas. Just a bit of pre-warning too, in June 2017, we're also running another one of our study tours, and we're going into Asia and Canada. And we're going to look at some smart transportation projects in those tours as well. To conclude today's session, though, I would like to acknowledge particularly the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative project team led by Elizabeth Dodd. Liz has had some technical issues to deal with today prior to the webinar going live, and that's always stressful, so I thank you, Liz, for getting through those and helping us today. I'd like to again acknowledge the expert reference group for this project. They've been great contributors to a number of activities behind the scenes. We would like to acknowledge the funding from the Queensland Government, but also the support that we gain from the personnel from the Department of Communities, Child Safety and Disability Services, who are working really collaboratively in this project. And I think this really highlights how public-private partnerships and collaborations can work and work well. And finally, again, I'd like to thank today's presenter, Dr. Neil Temperely. Thanks everyone for joining today's session, and remember to register your interest by joining the collaborative. Thank you.